George versus George, pages 23 through 26. A Tempest Over Tea, 1770 through 1774. And you see a picture of King George, and he's saying, "There must always be one tax to keep up the right. As such, I approve of the tea duty." It just so happened that on the very same day as the violence in Boston, Parliament and King George over in London were trying to keep the peace. They got rid of all import taxes except for one tiny tax on British tea. They thought that would solve the problem, but it didn't. Lots of loyalists resented paying any British taxes, no matter how tiny. It was a matter of principle. Some refused to drink British tea and drank tea smuggled from Holland instead. Others, including George Washington, stopped drinking tea altogether. By 1773, the British East India Company has so much unsold tea sitting around that it was about to go broke. To keep this tea company in business, Great Britain's Prime Minister, Lord North, proclaimed that absolutely nobody except the East India Company could sell any tea in America. To convince colonists to buy the tea, prices were set so low that even with tea taxes, the company's tea cost less than any other tea sold in England or in America. The colonists loved tea, but most of them still thought this was taxation without representation. British tea either rotted in warehouses or got sent straight back to England. Before long, Royal Governor of Massachusetts, Thomas Hutchinson, declared that unless the tax was paid, none of the tea shipped to Boston Harbor could be sent away. If the tea was not unloaded, ship commanders would force it on shore under the cover of their cannon's mouth. On the night of December 16, 1773, some Sons of Liberty covered their faces and hands with coal dust, disguised themselves as Mohawk Indians, and very calmly filed on board three ships filled with tea. Hundreds gathered to watch as the men split open 342 chests of British Darling tea with tomahawks and fed all 45 tons of it to the fish. Most Britons were outraged when they heard news of the wanton destruction. Americans were clearly a race of convicts. They had gone too far and must be punished. 6 months later, the king and an angry parliament closed Boston Harbor. Nothing could come in and nothing could go out. And you see that man over there saying, "Tea is the beverage of traitors." George versus George, 1774 through 1775. The port closure quickly put a huge number of Bostonians out of work. People were afraid they would starve. Other colonies scrambled to help by sending food, clothing, and flocks of sheep. Americans smuggled in at least 5,000 chests of tea from Holland alone. They also smuggled in gunpowder. Bostonians began to think of war. As the siege continued, people from all over the colonies became more and more alarmed. If Boston was in such a sea of trouble, who was to say that worse things couldn't happen in Philadelphia or Williamsburg or Charleston? George Washington didn't approve of the Tea Party one bit, but he approved of the punishment even less. So that's George Washington, and he's saying, "I am ready to raise 1,000 men, subsidize them myself at my own expense, and march at their head to Boston.